Greetings! Welcome back to Old Ways Rising Farm. Today we are going to continue with this little bit of a series of planting videos, and I want to talk to you a bit about a specific type of planting, a specific subset of companion planting really, that's often called Three Sisters gardening. This is the Native American system for growing corn, bean, squash, sunflower together in an orderly system where all of the different plants help take care of each other's needs. So the corn obviously grows corn, but because it's a big, tall, vertical plant, it can be used as a trellis that beans can grow on. The beans need that trellis. They grow up. Their roots occupy a different soil horizon relative to the corn, so they don't directly compete in that way. And because they're nitrogen fixers, they have rhizobium bacteria, which grow in nodules on their roots, capture the atmospheric nitrogen that I am breathing in and out to flap my gums at you, convert it into forms of nitrogen which are bioavailable to the plant. These are incorporated into the bean plant tissues, and then in the winter when the bean dies and those roots decompose, that nitrogen is released back into the soil system, and it slows down the degradation of land. Because corn is a very heavy feeder and is particularly hungry for nitrogen. Okay? So they help each other immensely. And then the squash expands out, and squash leaves, when you have good, abundant growth in your squash plants, do a magnificent job of imitating a tarp and shading the soil and knocking down the weeds. So the squash is then your weed control component. Now, the Three Sisters system has a lot more to it. Tobacco is a traditional part of these gardens, used in a lot of ceremonial ways for gifting, and in a religious capacity. And then sunflower is a key component as well. And the sunflower occupies the same role as the corn, a tall, nitrogen-hungry, heavy feeder upon which beans can grow, and from which the beans will protect the soil. So that's kind of the real crux of it. Now, how it's executed varies from region to region. Okay. Here in the Northeast, the traditional way to do this was to dig mounds and to create mounds of soil, fertilized at the bottom. And the reason that mounds are dug is because it minimizes the amount of territory that you have to dig. So you're only loosening the soil and fertilizing right where the plant roots are. And then because a big part of the system is the squash expanding out, the squash don't need to have soil fertility where their leaves are simply shading out grass. They need to have soil fertility where their roots are. So double digging mounds is a way to save labor. In the Midwest, you have a similar system, but it tended to be, it tends to be stretched out in rows, because the soils in the Midwest are typically richer than most areas in the East. There are, of course, exceptions. And they don't need as much fertilization. Okay? At least historically they did. Now, modern agricultural soils are abused no matter where you are, but historically they did not need as much nutrient added in. So it made sense there to put it in rows. In the Southwest, this is done, again, with mounds, but when the traditional corn plants are grown in dry land regions of the Southwest, they're growing a corn that is a very deep taproot, but needs a lot of space. So mounds, but only one corn and one bean per mound. Okay? So that they would be spaced out. And the corn would be spaced out enough so that the leaves don't touch. That way the roots don't touch. And they all have their own area for water capture. Now, pre-contact, there was an extensive system of waterworks throughout the whole southeastern corner of North America. And at the boundaries of that, where you had irrigation from that system, you would go back to more of a roads. But I'm talking like Allegheny, not Allegheny Plateau. That's right here. That's what we're on here. But like Colorado Plateau, and up at higher elevation where you have dry land cultivation. That's where you get mounds and an individual plant per mound. Okay? So it's not just one system, it's a cluster of systems that are growing similar plants. And you have many, many, many regional adaptations to the specifics of climate, topography, and habitat that work within the overarching umbrella. What I'm going to be doing today is sort of a modern modification of the Eastern North America Three Sisters garden. We're going to do mounds, but we're going to use manure, cow manure, as the fertility agents. Okay? So I'm going to start digging this here mound, and I'm going to talk while I dig. I'm going to start by removing 4 scoops of soil with the sod. 4-ish. Doesn't have to be 4. It just depends on what size of mound you want to make. Okay. And there is diversity in terms of what size mound you want to make, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But traditionally in Eastern North America, this was northeastern North America specifically, this was just to loosen the soil. Because the villages would move often enough that the soil would not be depleted faster than the beans could keep up with it. So there was no need to fertilize. Then when European colonization forced a more sedentary lifestyle on the Pequot and surrounding tribes, they were forced to learn fertilization, and that's where you get the idea of burying a fish in the bottom of the mound. I don't have a whole bunch of fish, and the shad runs were still good when that was done, so they're using shad guts for that. It was a waste product. Shad run in early spring. So they're going out to their fisheries, they're catching the shad, they're filleting off the meat, salting and drying it, and then the guts and the bones are going in the holes. Because it coincided, the shad run coincided with the corn planting time. Okay, back down here. Now, I took out 4 scoops of dirt and I put in 4 scoops of manure. This land that I'm gardening on historically was a potato field. Modern potato agriculture is one of the most abusive forms of agriculture on the land in terms of causing erosion and stripping nutrients out of the soil. So a few misadventures last year taught me that this is very, very poor growing soil and needs to be heavily amended. So I'm going at this with unaged calf barn bedding, because it's what I have and I'm using it in large quantity. But I'm going to make sure all the way along that this hole does not contain more than 50% of the bedding and the rest is native soil. The reason is because it'll heat. This is not fully composted. So it can still heat up and physically cook the roots. Okay? But because of how poor the soil is, and the fact that corn is a heavy feeder, this won't be too much nitrogen for this setting. How much you want to use is context specific. There's no one recipe that'll work for everywhere. So I'm going to put another layer down. 2 more scoops there. I'm going to put all this sod back on top. couple more scoops. Okay. Now I just need to chop up these lumps of sod a little bit. So this is my fertilizer, because I don't have a shad run. But I do have a neighbor who raised calves. Use what you got. Remember, there's many regional adaptations that involve this method. Use what you got, use what works in your context. Maybe you live by a fish processing plant of some sort, and you would have a supply of fish guts. Use it. Great stuff. Maybe you're just an avid fisherman and filleted a whole bunch of bluegills or something. Use it. Good stuff. Use what makes sense in your context. Now, my mounds are smaller. I'm just saying 4 scoops of soil because it's kind of this is a well-known reference. So you can picture the size here. And I'm going to plant the corn and the beans in these mounds. And then these are arranged on a grid, 1 full pace apart. Right? Half pace, full pace. Was that all in frame? Could you see my feet?
The end of it was.
The end of it wasn't quite. Okay. Well, full pace is starting from left and ending on left, but with a natural gait. Mm-hmm. So in the middle, let me draw. So like, if there's mounds here and here, here and here, I'll make a mound in the middle, and that will be where I put my squash. There's a reason for this, and that is you have to stagger the planting, or the vines will overwhelm their trellis. So this is 1st of May, 2nd of May, 2nd of May, when I am filming this. I'm now going to plant. I'm not sure what the germination rate is going to be on these seeds. So I'm going to put 8 in here. I want at least 6 to grow so that they have good pollination. This is Lenape blue corn. This is an authentic corn for this method. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This isn't authentic corn for this method, but the corn needs to have some height. It needs to be ankle high before you plant your beans, so the beans will grow too fast and squash the little baby corn stem. This works in the same mound because it's a month until I can plant the beans. So I just planted the corn here. I'll wait on this in a month, 1st of June. I'll come out. I'll take some more soil and mound it up around the base of the corn, and we'll do a video on this too when it comes time. And the corn will then grow adventitious roots out the side of the stalk, and it will help them anchor. It will help prevent drought stress, and they'll have more access to nutrients. Then I'll plant the beans in. Okay? So the corn will have 2 weeks to germinate, 2 weeks to grow. Get a little bit more soil on, just up to the top of its growing leaves. Then the beans will have 2 weeks to germinate. They'll start growing. The corn will be up a month and have a month head start. The beans need also about 2 weeks after germination, so a month head start on the squash, if you put the squash in the same mound. Okay? I don't have enough time in this climate to do that. So that's why I'll do 2 squash in the middle in their own mound. Then I could put them right in June. Because they'll have enough time delay till they expand out big enough to reach the edges of these corn and bean mounds. They'll have enough of a time delay that it'll work. In the southeastern quadrant of North America, they would only dig one mound and it would have everything. But there you have 2 months more growing season at least relative to what I have, right? So in North Carolina, instead of a 4 scoop mound, this would be an 8 or 10 scoop mound. It would come out to here, right? It would be twice as wide. Corn would go in the middle. It would have its month. Then the beans would go on the edge. They'd have their month. Then I'd go right around the edge and plant the squash. Right in the same mound. And it would take 2 months to get all of that in, but there would still be 120, 140 days of growing season because of how long the summers are. Okay? And how long it takes to get to the frost season. So that's the southeastern adaptation relative to the northeastern adaptation. So if you start reading about this system and see all sorts of different things going on, that's why. Because there's a lot of different things going on. A lot of different people adapted this to fit their specific climate and habitat. So if you're going to implement this, make sure that you're choosing both crop varieties that are appropriate for your area and an adaptation of the system that is appropriate for your area, because I guarantee there is one. And that's true even if you're watching this from other places, right? So if you're watching this from France, go with the Southern Appellation method. If you're watching this from Germany, go with the Northern Appellation method that I'm doing here, right? So find an analogous climate, whatever is your closest climate in North America, and see what they were doing. If you're in dryland Spain, go with what they were doing on the Colorado Plateau. Okay? So it's very adaptable, and there's a way you can do it. You just have to be conscious of what types of varieties you're planting and which variation on the theme you're implementing. Okay?